So Tánaiste, I suppose the big question emerging this morning is how are you going to convince unionists that this doesn't threaten the integrity of the United Kingdom?
Well, look, there's a very clear line. The first line of the first article of the Irish Protocol in this treaty makes it very clear that the constitutional issues that apply to the United Kingdom, which includes Northern Ireland, of course, are dealt with in the Good Friday Agreement. And the principle of consent is what determines the future constitutional status of Northern Ireland. And so that will only change if the majority of people vote for that. So what we're dealing with in this treaty is the consequences of a trading environment that, unless we're careful, may result in border infrastructure that nobody wants. And so that is what the backstop is about, and that is why we're saying in the future relationship that we want to agree and negotiate. We want to deal comprehensively with the border issue and with trade in a way that maintains the status quo and doesn't change the constitutional status of Northern Ireland in any way.
Dominic Raab was involved in these negotiations for the last several months, and he says in his letter of resignation that the integrity of the United Kingdom is challenged. Is he missing something here, or what's your view of his resignation?
Well, look, I'm not sure what he means by that, quite frankly, but Dominic Raab has been involved in these discussions. I've met Dominic Raab and spoken to him about it. The backstop was very much part of these negotiations, part of the commitment of last December and last March by the British government. And so what we have done is change the backstop essentially to try and accommodate British concerns, to ensure that there would be no customs checks between Britain and Northern Ireland, to address a concern that he and the Prime Minister has outlined. But he has his reasons for resignation, and I haven't seen any detailed statement from him yet.
Were you surprised by the fact that he decided to step down? I mean, it was leaked details of your meeting with him, which you went on to describe as robust. Can you tell us any more about what he raised with you that day in particular, and were you surprised that he stood down this morning?
Well, first of all, I was very upfront about that meeting. It was a private meeting, but there was no secret about it, and it's perfectly understandable that the person who's involved in trying to coordinate Ireland's negotiating position on Brexit would meet with the person who has the responsibility for trying to coordinate Britain's negotiating position on Brexit. And we explored ideas, and I made it clear to him that we couldn't sign up to a backstop that Britain could pull out of unilaterally, and we couldn't sign up to a backstop that had a definitive end time to it, unless there was something to replace the backstop that would do the same job. I think he understood that. That's been the Irish position for well over a year. If we didn't have a backstop that was robust, it wouldn't be a backstop at all. But I think the important thing in relation to this backstop is that it is only an insurance mechanism. It's a last resort issue. And there are many other ways in which we can resolve the border issue that won't require us to use the backstop at all. But I think it is important that we followed through on the promise that had been made that that insurance mechanism would be there in the background. And that's what the backstop is about.
A lot of rhetoric around this being cast iron, bulletproof deal, but it's not really cast iron unless Theresa May can get her numbers. What's the Irish government strategy now? Will you be trying to help her to collect the numbers to get this through the UK Parliament?
Well, I think the first thing to say, though, is, the negotiating here was successful. We got an agreement between the British government and the EU here, which was signed off on last night. Of course, the ratification process of that now in Westminster is a challenge, and the Prime Minister has said that there are difficult days ahead. She has shown herself to be tough, to be resilient, and to be persuasive. And I think she'll need to be all of those things in the days ahead, but I wish her well with that, because the British Prime Minister has followed through on her commitments to Ireland. She understands the fragility and the complexity of relationships on this island and the relationships in Northern Ireland, which are part of the United Kingdom. And she has factored that in to the commitments that she's made in the legal text of this treaty. And now, of course, we have to wait and see whether that treaty will be ratified in Westminster in a very divisive and somewhat chaotic political environment, which, of course, she's trying to give leadership through.
Finally, does planning here in Ireland go on for a no-deal scenario now?
Yeah, of course. I mean, those contingency plans continue. I'll be in Letterkenny and Limerick getting Brexit Ireland ready roadshows in the coming weeks. I mean, that work has been ongoing for a year now. We have put a lot of money aside to make sure that our agencies can support businesses, that there are loan facilities in place, working capital facilities in place linked to Brexit, grants available for businesses to actually take on board consultants and experts to help prepare them for Brexit. So all of that work continues because we can't take anything for granted, that's for sure. But while we prepare for all scenarios, including the worst case scenario of a no deal, we will of course continue to focus on how we can contribute to a negotiation to get the best possible outcome, which is a sensible, managed, controlled Brexit that involves a legal text that protects Ireland.
Tánaiste Simon Coveney, thank you for joining us on independent.ie.
Thank you, anytime.